lactate production and mitochondrial shuttle. Lactate production retards, not cause acidosis. This is the last slide of glycolysis of the previous lecture entitled glycolysis. The last product of either glycolysis or glycogenolysis is pyruvate. And pyruvate can be transported into the mitochondria and convert to acetyl coenzyme A to fuel mitochondrial respiration, or alternatively can be converted to lactate in the cytosol. Now let's look during resting and steady-state condition. There are phase 1 and 2 of glycolysis. We focus on phase 2 of glycolysis. Remember, I said the most important and busiest step is the step 6 of glycolysis, right? The step 6 is the glycerol-aldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenases reaction. This is an extremely important reaction of glycolysis. First of all, this reaction involves the phosphate addition to G3P, forming a 2-phosphate group bisphosphate product, which is 1,3-bisphosphoglycerate. As you already learned, this set up sufficient free energy release for ATP regeneration in a subsequent reaction. Another important feature of this reaction, for me more important, is the release of electrons and protons that are added to NAD+, which is a coenzyme of metabolic uber taxi, forming NADH, effectively capturing the electrons and protons for later involvement in energy catabolism. The fact that NAD+ is a substrate for this reaction is also important for understanding the need for NAD+ in glycolysis, and for how either our mitochondrial respiration or lactate production can regenerate NAD+ for this purpose. During resting and steady-state condition, pyruvate enters the mitochondria to be further catabolized by a series of reactions that collectively yield CO2, release additional electron and proton, and consume oxygen, and produce large quantity of ATP. Simply, pyruvate during resting and steady-state condition can be transported into the mitochondria and convert to acetyl coenzyme A to fuel mitochondrial respiration. From the previous lecture, you were informed about the production of 2 NADH molecules plus 2 protons. Given that glycolysis is dependent on a regeneration of NAD+ to function as a substrate in the step 6, there must be a means to remove these 2 electrons and 2 protons from cytosolic NADH and regenerate cytosolic NAD+. There are always 2 NADH and 2 proton released per complete G6P glycerol 3-phosphate flux through the glycolysis, as the added electron and proton represented by these 2 products have a potential to contribute to oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria. There needs to be a biochemical method for transferring them from the cytosol into the mitochondria. There are indirect electron and proton transfer systems where electron and proton are shuttled across the mitochondrial membranes in the form of specific transport proteins. There are 2 such systems prevalent in cell, the malate-aspartate shuttle and the glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle. The malate-aspartate shuttle is believed to be the main shuttle expressed in the liver, kidney, and heart muscle. The glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle is operable in skeletal muscle and the brain. Today's lecture mainly focuses on skeletal muscle, so the shuttle here is the glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle. The glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle is simpler in biochemical scheme than the malate aspartate shuttle. Cytolic NADH plus proton are used to reduce dihydroxyacetone phosphate, a glycolytic 3-carbon intermediate, to glycerol 3-phosphate via the enzyme glycerol 3-phosphate dehydrogenases. The glycerol 3-phosphate crosses the outer mitochondrial membrane, where it connects to an inner membrane bound mitochondrial glycerol 3-phosphate dehydrogenase enzyme, which catalyzes the reverse reaction. Most important thing is that on this mitochondrial side, the electron and 2 protons are used to reduce FAD to FADH2. Again, the crucial point with the glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle is that it indirectly transfers a cytolic NADH plus proton to mitochondrial FADH2. In summary, after glycolysis, 2 NADH plus proton and 2 pyruvate are 2 of the molecules formed. During resting and steady-state condition, the NADH plus proton molecules go into the inner membrane of the mitochondria and reduce FAD to FADH2. Pyruvate goes directly into the mitochondrial matrix. Again, this is the last slide of glycolysis of the previous lecture entitled Glycolysis. I showed how pyruvate can be transported into the mitochondria. However, alternatively, pyruvate can be converted to lactate in the cytosol. Now this time, let's look at lactate production. First, I would like to define what metabolic acidosis is. Metabolic acidosis occurs when increased cellular energy demand causes an increased release of proton and a subsequent decrease in cellular and system blood pH. We are now ready to discuss one of misunderstood reactions in exercise science and in both fitness and health industry. The historical development of exercise biochemistry and exercise physiology viewed intense exercise to cause the production of lactic acid, which in turn release a proton to cause metabolic acidosis. However, such a belief was totally incorrect. Rather, lactate production occurs in a non-acid form, and lactate consumes a proton, not release a proton. Lactate production retards, not cause acidosis. During intense exercise, the stimulation of glycogenolysis and glycolysis is so great that there is a dramatic increase in the rate of substrate flux through glycolysis. Depending on the proportion of slow versus fast twitch motor unit and the endurance training status of this motor unit, the capacity for converting pyruvate to acyl coenzyme A and having the glycerol 3-phosphate shuttle functioning at similar rates depends on the mitochondrial mass or density within the working muscle. The more endurance trained the muscle and the higher the proportion of slow twitch motor unit, the greater the capacity of the contracted muscle fibers to use mitochondrial respiration to supply most of ATP and regenerate most of the NAD+. However, for specific individuals at specific exercise intensities, there comes an intensity and rate of ATP demand that exceed the capacity of the recruit muscle fibers to sustain the cellular ATP demand from mitochondrial respiration. At this increasing exercise intensity, the contracting muscle fibers must now rely more and more on lactate dehydrogenase reaction to regenerate NAD+. Thus, increased lactate production, although not caused by a lack of oxygen or being the cause of acidosis, remains a good marker for change in metabolism, indicating an increasing role of glycolytic and phosphogenic system ATP regeneration in supporting the energetic of the repeated muscle contraction. Now, think what would happen if muscle could not produce lactate. As soon as exercise became more intense, there would be no way to rely on added ATP from glycolysis, as there would be no means for reaction in the cytosol to regenerate NAD plus from the NADH from glycolysis. This would result in a failing NAD plus divided by NADH ratio, NAD plus NADH ratio, called the redox potential. The main consequence of this would be a decrease in the rate of glycerol-aldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase reaction, causing a near shutdown of the glycolytic pathway. Lactate is produced by the lactate dehydrogenase reaction, as shown here. For this reaction, the substrate are pyruvate, NADH, and a proton with the products being lactate and NAD+. The protons that are released from glycolysis do not come from the production of neither lactic acid or lactate. This is interesting, right? Lactate is not a harmful molecule. Look at the lactate dehydrogenase reaction again. Note that instead of producing a proton, what lactate production really consumes a proton. As such, lactate production is a major component of what is called metabolic proton buffering, thereby retarding, not contributing to acidosis. After glycolysis 2, NADH as proton and 2-pyruvate are two of the molecules formed. During resting and steady-state condition, the NADH plus proton molecules go into the inner membrane of the mitochondrion and reduce FAD to FADH2. Pyruvate goes directly into the mitochondrial matrix. However, during strenuous exercise, the energy demand exceeds the oxygen supply in the ETC, causing a backup in the ETC. NADH plus proton is inhibited and therefore donate its hydrogen ion to pyruvate, reducing pyruvate to lactate. NAD plus can then return to the step of the 6 of glycolysis to pick up more hydrogen ion or proton. These are glossary words. Thank you.